Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 195, Sick Days. The episode begins with Ash and the gang taking a break by a lakeside area, with Ash, Brock, and Misty having let out their Pokemon to relax. Onix, Geodude, Noctowl, and Cyndaquil were chilling, and Pikachu and Chikorita were drinking water with Ash by the lake. As for Misty and Togepi, they were preparing for breakfast, as Brock was supposed to be as well, making some of the oatmeal that they usually had for breakfast. Ash then went up to Brock to question him why he was making oatmeal for the fucking 10,000th time, especially because Ash wanted something different today, since he planned to get a whole bunch of training in. However, when Ash called Brock, he didn't answer and had his back turned, indicating that he was really busy making the goddamn oatmeal. So Ash tapped him on the back to get his attention, but Brock just fell to the ground. Ash assumes that Brock fell to the ground because he felt insulted by Ash insulting his oatmeal and not wanting it, so Ash apologizes, but this does nothing, and Brock stays there motionless, leaving Misty to check his head and find out that he had a fever, leading Ash and Misty to put Brock inside the nearby cabin that they were staying at so that he can get some rest. Realizing that him being knocked out likely meant that he was very sick, or potentially overworked, since he'd been doing a lot for them lately. As all of their Pokemon watched through the windows, Misty and Ash put Brock on the bed to let him rest for the whole day, and were about to take their exit from the cabin when Brock suddenly woke up and sat up. The first thing he said upon sitting up was that he had to do a whole bunch of work, such as chores, signifying once again that this apparent sickness was probably caused by him being overworked. Ash and Misty tried to stop him from getting up and doing chores, insisting that he was too sick, but Brock refused and got out of bed, only to then collapse yet again from severe dizziness, leading Ash to throw him in bed yet again and practically force him to stay in bed, stating that him and Misty could handle the chores for the day. Brock protests yet again, but once Ash covers him up with a blanket and he realizes that he can barely function due to his dizziness, he eventually agrees. Although assures Ash and Misty that if they needed any instructions on how to do certain things, they shouldn't hesitate to wake him up and ask him. Ash and Misty didn't want to do this, stating that he didn't need to worry about them, but he insists that they might need help, and tells them to use a blue book that he had in his backpack that contained a whole bunch of instructions on how to do certain chores. So Ash and Misty decide to use it as Togepi grabs it from Brock's backpack. As Ash and Misty read through the blue book, they realize just how much Brock catered to them and did a whole bunch of things for them, noting how they didn't know how they survived without Brock for as long as they did. Once they finish reading the blue book, Ash and Misty are more determined than ever to repay the favors that Brock has done for them by doing his chores just for today. They're debating what to start with, when suddenly Brock's Geodude and Onix come up to them, and Misty remembers that Brock usually polished them, so they probably wanted to polish. Ash confidently declares that he would do a better job than Brock at polishing Onix and Geodude, but when they actually start doing so with some brushes, they realize that polishing rock Pokemon was harder than they anticipated. So Misty instructs Togepi to go get Brock's instruction booklet, and Misty reads how to polish properly as she polishes Geodude, while Ash still struggles with polishing Onix. Ash was having such a difficult time, barely making any progress due to how big Onix was, that he decided to send out his Totodile to help him by spraying Onix, as spraying things with water usually counted as polishing, but when Ash did this, it made Onix angry, as he began to try and dodge all of the water guns, leading Misty to remind Ash that rock Pokemon hated water. Upon remembering this, Ash instantly orders Totodile to stop firing water guns, but right as Totodile fires the last one, Onix struggles to dodge it a lot, to the point where he accidentally hits Ash and Misty with his tail, knocking them down. As Misty and Ash lie on the ground, almost knocked out, they were really wishing that Brock would heal up so that he could get back to doing his chores. Speaking of what Brock was doing now, though, he was currently dreaming. Specifically, he was dreaming about a beautiful place with a beautiful blossom and beautiful women as well. He initially thought the place itself, being a flower meadow, was the most beautiful thing, and then he thought the dancing blossom were the most beautiful thing. But then, when he saw those three women who were calling his name, he instantly thought they were the most beautiful, and ran up to them. Unfortunately, when he attempts to get closer to the women, his dream is cut short as a meteor falls from the sky and hits him, knocking him into a void, causing him to wake up and notice that Pineco was laying on his chest and Golbat was at his side, leading Brock to thank them for watching over him while he was sleeping, telling him that he just had a very frustrating nightmare. Brock then overheard from outside Ash and Misty arguing about how Ash failed to polish Onix, and begins to get worried that Ash and Misty couldn't handle themselves on their own, and wants to go settle the argument to make sure they didn't fucking kill each other. However, when he gets out of bed, Golbat uses a light supersonic attack to cause him to fall back down into his bed, kind of dazed, so that he can fall back asleep. Brock tries to get up again, but he realizes that Golbat and Pineco were trying to get him to stay in bed to rest, and he appreciated Golbat and Pineco's concern, so he decided to oblige to what they wanted and go back to sleep, hoping that he wouldn't have another nightmare, almost crying from appreciation for Pineco and Golbat. As Brock falls back asleep, Misty and Ash eventually stop arguing, as Ash decides that to cheer himself up and just put everyone in a better mood, he was going to go get some food, and Misty declares that she was going to stay behind and continue with the chores, specifically doing some washing for their clothes. As Ash and his Pokemon walk into a nearby forest to look for some fruit, they expected to see, some apples or something, especially when they go into what looked to be an apple orchard based on the size of the trees. For some reason, though, there was no apples on any of the trees. Ash then spots none other than Team Rocket, who were the reason as to why there was no apples on the trees, as they were currently sucking them up off the trees with a vacuum, stating that they planned to both eat and sell them. Ash questions why they were doing something like this, stating that they usually resorted to stealing Pokemon, and says that stealing food was almost as bad, as that would mean that he would starve if Team Rocket stole all the apples, so he tries to guilt-trip them into giving them some of the apples, but Jesse and James obviously don't care, and they simply just state their motto, restating their plan to sell the apples and eat the rest, because, they wanted money, and that's what they cared about. Ash then taunts that Team Rocket had resorted to stealing apples because they were too unskilled to be able to capture Pikachu. This leads Meowth to tell Ash to shut up and mind his own business and stop questioning their goddamn methods, as he proceeds to suck up Pikachu with the vacuum as well, and capture him inside of the vacuum, with Meowth stating that although they were stealing apples, they obviously couldn't have forgot their primary goal. Angered by seeing Pikachu be captured, Ash's Pokemon, being Totodile, Cyndaquil, Chikorita, and Bulbasaur, rally together in order to get Pikachu back, as Team Rocket initiates a battle by sending out their Arbok and Victreebel respectively, although Victreebel of course eats James as usual. The battle then starts, with Arbok using Poison Sting, but Totodile counters by using Water Gun, which knocks Arbok back. This gives Cyndaquil the opportunity to use a flamethrower right at all of Team Rocket, which also hits their vacuum, destroying it and freeing Pikachu, which allows Pikachu to do the honors of finishing off Team Rocket with a Thunderbolt, blasting them off. Bulbasaur and Chikorita are somewhat pissed off that they didn't get to do any ass-kicking, so Bulbasaur wanted to find some way to help. So he walks around the area and notices that when Team Rocket blasted off, they dropped all of the apples that were inside their vacuum, and he alerts Ash of this, leading Ash to take back several of the apples that Team Rocket tried to steal, knowing that Brock and Misty would be very grateful, as he heads back to the cabin. Speaking of Brock, he was currently dreaming yet again. This time, he was standing on some clouds, watching some butterfree fly among the skies, when he suddenly notices the three girls from his first dream calling his name again, and he tries to go to them yet again, only to fall through the clouds and into a void in the dream and fall off of his bed in reality, causing him to wake up. As soon as he wakes up, he's obviously shocked to be off the bed, but he's even more shocked when he sees Ash and Misty standing right by him, who themselves were shocked that Brock had fallen out of the bed. Everyone's just fucking shocked, okay? Ash and Misty then reveal that the reason why they were in the cabin was because they wanted to give Brock some of the apples that Ash had picked, that he had cut up into slices. Brock eagerly takes one, actually having an appetite now, and he begins to eat even more. He began eating the slices so fast that he started to choke on them, leading Golbat to have to pat him on the back with his wing to help the apples go down the right pipe. Misty was excited by this, as she explained to Brock that he must actually be getting better now, since his appetite was returning. Upon hearing that he was getting better, Brock instantly decided to get up and go to work, stating he had to get done some chores. But Ash and Misty ordered him to sleep a lot longer, at least for the rest of the day, because he was only getting better. He wasn't better yet. Brock realizes that he was still dizzy, so he comes to the conclusion that Ash and Misty were right, and he decides to keep on sleeping, claiming that he would try and run faster to catch the girls this time. Misty and Ash were obviously confused by this, not knowing that Brock was talking about his potential dream. Ash begins to think that maybe Brock was sicker than they thought, and he was going insane at this point. And although Brock knew he wasn't, he didn't want to admit that he was having a dream about girls, as Misty would just call him a sib as usual, so he simply just stated he was fine and went back to sleep. Brock wasn't the only one who was sleeping, as Ash's Pokemon and Brock's Pokemon were sleeping as well, with the exception of Ash's Totodile. And as for Misty's Pokemon, her Poliwhirl, Staryu, and Goldeen, they were playing in the water with Totodile. While the Pokemon relaxed, Ash and Misty could definitely not relax, as they were still in charge of doing several chores for the day, such as making dinner and chopping some firewood. Ash was handling the chopping, while Misty had decided to be in charge of dinner, arguing with Ash that it was more important than firewood, since dinner time was fast approaching, only for Ash to argue that dinner time usually meant it was getting dark, so a fire would be important as well. Regardless of this argument, Ash and Misty continued with their tasks, and while Ash was doing good at chopping logs, Misty was not doing good at cooking. She was trying her best to follow Brock's recipe from the Blue Book. However, she had accidentally put salt instead of sugar. She tries to correct her mistake by having Togepi bring her the bag of sugar instead, but when she begins pouring it, the bag tears open and pours in way too much sugar, leading Misty to fear that the dish will now be too sweet. So, she commands her Psyduck to bring the salt back to her so that she could try and equalize the amount of sugar and salt, but when she shakes the salt bag, it accidentally causes a large clump to go into the pot. She then realizes that there was probably too much sugar and salt at this point, so the dish was fucked to begin with, so she decides to just willy-nilly add some more sugar, hoping that just making it sweeter would make it taste better. She then realizes that since she'd already fucked up the recipe, she might as well change it even more, as just adding sugar and salt seemed pretty boring. So, she adds a whole bunch of random-ass ingredients, such as ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, soy sauce, cinnamon, and Worcestershire sauce, stating that it was because of being able to do shit like this that she loved cooking, as she proceeded to add even more wild shit, causing Psyduck to react with pure horror. Shortly after Misty's horror concoction was finished, dinner time approached, and Misty asked Ash if he was hungry, with Ash confirming that he was starving. Well, he was, until he saw and smelled the dish that Misty served, stating that he was actually extremely full from all the apples earlier, not wanting to admit that he simply just didn't want to eat Misty's mystery stew that smelled and looked completely disgusting. However, Misty could see right through Ash's lie, knowing that he just didn't want to taste her food, so she decides to just let Ash suffer, quote-unquote, by not eating this, and decides to eat the entire meal to herself. But when she takes the first bite, she realizes that Ash was right, and it tasted absolutely terrible, much to her dismay, as she was angry at both herself for making it, and the fact that Ash was proven right. She didn't want to admit that to Ash, though, so she simply lies, and states that the food just had a unique flavor. Later that night, when it was time for bed, despite Ash and Misty being the ones to work all day, they still decide to sleep outside in their sleeping bags so that they didn't disturb Brock in the middle of the night so he could get better rest, doing so as a sort of reward after realizing how much Brock did for them. They continued talking about Brock for quite a while, but realized that that could keep him up as well, so they decided to just go to sleep, as do all of the Pokemon, with a lot of them sleeping outside. With Noctowl sleeping in a tree, Brock and Geodude sleeping together, and Chikorita, Totodile, Bulbasaur, and Cyndaquil sleeping together. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was spying on everyone as they slept through some bushes. Creepy. They were planning to steal Pikachu, as usual, although once they saw how all of Ash's Pokemon were separated from him aside from Pikachu, sleeping, they decided that it would be easier to capture Ash's other Pokemon, being Totodile, Bulbasaur, Cyndaquil, and Chikorita, not Noctowl, because it was too high up in the tree. Jessie was kind of nervous to go in with this plan on an empty stomach, so thankfully for her, she then spotted none other than Misty's mystery stew, which she had thrown in the bushes since neither she or Ash wanted to eat it. Jessie immediately complains about how Ash and Misty didn't know the poor people's struggle, stating that she would never throw away a meal. James and Meowth argue that it was probably disgusting, but Jessie counters back that there was nothing disgusting about a free meal, as she chows down and claims it was the most delicious food she had ever tasted. Meowth and James are convinced and reluctantly decide to help themselves to some of the stew, but just as they had expected, they were disgusted by it, throwing up. Jessie doesn't fucking understand how James and Meowth could find this disgusting, as she continues to eat it and decides to feed some to Wobbuffet to get him to settle it. Unfortunately for Jessie, it was 3 against 1, with 3 believing that the meal sucked ass, as Wobbuffet literally passed out from how bad it tasted. Team Rocket then changed the subject of the conversation to planning for how they were going to steal all of Ash's Pokemon, stating that once they did, they were going to sell them so that they could buy an orchard of apples of their very own. They then come up with a plan to keep Ash and Misty asleep so that they couldn't wake up and save their Pokemon, and then they would lure Ash's Pokemon to them by using an Ash robot with Ash's voice, because they would use a voice changer, and essentially, Ash's Pokemon would end up getting lured to the robot, allowing Team Rocket to swoop in and capture them. So, they went through with this plan, and managed to wake up Bulbasaur, Chikorita, Cyndaquil, and Totodile, but by the sound of Ash's voice, as the 4 of them immediately rushed to the sound, which was actually Team Rocket in the bushes. When Ash's Pokemon see the Ash robot, they fall for the trick, thinking that it really was Ash, with the exception of Bulbasaur, who realized the truth and tried to warn the others not to go up to the robot, but they did, and as a result, they were captured inside a net by Team Rocket. Unfortunately, Bulbasaur ended up in the net as well, despite being the smart one, because it had ran after the other Pokemon in an attempt to stop them, so it ended up in the same spot. As the 4 captured Pokemon cried out, Ash and Misty were woken up by this and instantly ran over to where the net was, spotting Team Rocket, who were currently running away with the net, leading Ash and Misty to pursue them, taking the rest of their Pokemon with them, including Brock's Geodude and Onix. Meanwhile, back inside the cabin, Brock was sleeping and was dreaming yet again of seeing the 3 girls who called for him once again, this time on a beach. He immediately ran to them, but got swept up by a wave as he cried, causing him to wake up. Right after doing so, his Golbat and Pineco hurriedly get his attention, directing his attention to the window, where Brock sees Misty and Ash running, and comes to the correct conclusion that they must be chasing after Team Rocket. Anyways, as Ash and Misty were chasing Team Rocket with all of their Pokemon, as you would expect, they suddenly fall into a pitfall trap dug by Team Rocket, causing Team Rocket to laugh at Ash and Misty's failure, stating that they should have known that there'd be a pitfall trap involved, as they then hop into their nearby Meowth balloon, which has now been upgraded with jet engines, and attach the net containing Bulbasaur, Cyndaquil, Chikorita, and Totodile to the bottom of the balloon, as they then shoot out 4 claws from the jet engines that capture Onix, Poliwhirl, Staryu, and Pikachu, just as Team Rocket had planned. However, they ended up taking Pikachu last, as Pikachu managed to avoid the claws originally and went to go use Thunderbolt on Team Rocket, but Misty instructed him not to do so, as that could have harmed the other Pokemon if Pikachu hit the balloon. So since Pikachu couldn't defend himself, that allowed Team Rocket to then capture him, especially inside an electric-proof cage, where he still couldn't do any electric attacks. Now with no Pokemon to attack Team Rocket with, Ash and the gang had realized that it seemed like Team Rocket had actually won after all, as they began to panic. Thankfully, though, Brock and his Golbat and Pineco then showed up in a Deus Ex Machina moment, wanting to help out, as Brock commands his Golbat to use Wing Attack on the Meowth balloon, sending it crashing down. When the balloon crashes down, this also destroys both the net holding Cyndaquil, Totodile, Bulbasaur, and Chikorita, and the claws holding Onix, Geodude, Poliwhirl, and Staryu. So, all of the Pokemon were set free, along with Pikachu, even in his electric-proof cage. As all the free Pokemon then reunite with their trainers, Ash and Misty worry for Brock, stating that he should still be in bed resting, but Brock assures them that he was fine, as he then commands his Golbat and Pineco to team up and attack Arbok and Weezing, who Team Rocket had just sent out. Golbat and Pineco do so, using Tackle on Arbok and Weezing, sending them flying into Team Rocket. To make sure that Arbok and Weezing couldn't get back up, Brock has Onix use Rock Throw to trap Arbok and Weezing, which scares Jessie and James, as they now had no Pokemon, aside from Meowth and Wobbuffet, to defend themselves with. Before they could even command Meowth and Wobbuffet to do anything though, Pikachu then uses Thunderbolt, sending Team Rocket blasting off. Ash and the gang are relieved to see Team Rocket gone, and Brock in better condition, with Brock glad that he had just managed to get up out of bed and stop being a lazy ass to save his friends, with Ash and Misty assuring him that he wasn't being a lazy ass, and he simply just needed a break. The next morning, now that Brock was feeling better, he was more than eager to get back to his usual working routine. So, like usual, he was up before Ash and Misty, already cooking some oatmeal. When Ash and Misty wake up, they are immediately enamored by the delicious smell, and realize that Brock was back up and back to his normal self already. Despite getting sick of oatmeal before, Ash and Misty were just glad to have Brock back, and didn't want to disrespect him for trying his best anymore, so they said that the oatmeal was super delicious, which they weren't even lying at this point. They were just glad to have some actual good food. Brock very much appreciates the compliment, and confirms that he would start getting back to work on all the other chores today. However, Misty and Ash then realized that it was probably best to give Brock yet another day of sleep to make sure that he didn't immediately overwork himself again and get sick again. Brock initially declines, stating that he was perfectly fine and felt better than ever, but when he remembers that he might have a chance to dream about those 3 girls again, he stops his protests and eagerly accepts Ash and Misty's request for him to get some sleep, as he goes back into the cabin and does so. He does end up dreaming about the 3 girls again, and this time he actually manages to catch up to them. Yay! Ash and Misty were confused when they heard Brock mention 3 girls, and they were even more confused when they went in the cabin to check up on Brock, and they overheard him in his sleep saying, "Please don't wake up," indicating that he got really lucky with those 3 girls. Damn.